Okay, guys, so if you can believe it, Batman Arkham City came out 9 years ago. In this video, I'm going to revisit it, and I've been replaying it recently. Wanted to give you my thoughts on my experience replaying 9 years later. So one thing to keep in mind is that this game was really made in a different era. Now games take like 6, 8, 9, 10 years to develop, and they're frequently delayed. Arkham City, however, was released 2 months and 2 years after the release of Batman Arkham Asylum, so they had a very quick turnaround for this game. Also, Rocksteady had a staff about of 120 at the time, which is substantially under what most studios have these days, including Rocksteady today. Arkham Asylum was already phenomenal, but the story just felt so much more elevated in this one. We start as Bruce Wayne, and we're talking to all of Gotham. We're being interviewed by Vicky Vale, and this set the stage really for a story that was not as contained as Batman Arkham Asylum. In Arkham Asylum, we had very little interaction with the broader community of Gotham, and that changed immediately as we're introduced to Hugo Strange, journalists, reporters, and we're also giving a press conference in front of Arkham City. So it didn't end up obviously being a totally uncontained story that took place throughout all of Gotham, but the map was substantially larger in this game, and I think that it was large enough to justify fans accepting that and not being upset that the map wasn't larger because it was so much bigger than it was in Arkham Asylum. I also just really appreciate how Rocksteady did their own thing here. They very easily could have followed a storyline from an existing comic book. They kind of followed Long Halloween or more closely, realistically, Batman Hush with how many villains they included here, but they kept it in a contained story. They introduced their own thing with Hugo Strange and Ra's al Ghul, and they really took it in a strong direction that was uniquely theirs. And I'm glad that they did not just copy Batman Hush or Long Halloween. Okay, let's talk about the villains in this one. The Joker really makes the game. You know, Mark Hamill is incredible. In Arkham Asylum, Mark Hamill was fantastic as well. But here they really explore the relationship and the duality between Batman and the Joker. This just elevated the game, and it really elevated their relationship, and it made their conflict feel much more cinematic the way that they were pitted against one another. The blood transfusion literally bonded them in a way that they were not bonded in Batman Arkham Asylum, and it really elevated their relationship. I feel that Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy both upped their game from Asylum to City, and I'll talk more about the performances in Asylum in a future video, but needless to say, they both did a fantastic job in this game. Two-Face is also really good. This is the first time we see him in the Batman Arkham franchise. There was a Easter egg for him in Batman Arkham Asylum with a jail cell that was commemorated to Two-Face, insinuating that he was living there at one point, but we never actually saw him in the game. And he was really an integral character in this story right from the start, holding Catwoman hostage at the very beginning, so that was fantastic to see. We also were introduced to Bruce Wayne's allies or semi-allies with seeing Tim Drake in person. We got to see Ra's al Ghul in person. We got to talk to Talia al Ghul, Azrael, and others. This really helped make the Arkhamverse feel more grounded and relatable to fans of the animated series. And while I was also really a fan of including Aaron Cash and characters from the first game to make them feel very connected, they also introduced new characters to make the game feel fresh. One of the problems that Rocksteady and Paul Dini actually ran into with this game is that they're entirely too good at writing compelling villains, and it made the game feel somewhat schizophrenic at times, especially in the second act, where you're going between so many villains and they have so much going on with Mr. Freeze and Penguin and Joker, and there's so much going on there that it can feel overwhelming in a sense. I think having replayed the game several times and knowing what to expect, it's not really an issue for me, and also they do so many villains that I really love, and they do them all so well that I can't think of one I would have wanted them to exclude for the sake of expediency or simplifying the plot. So I don't even know if it's a nitpick or a complaint, but it's just something worth noting that some fans might experience. Also, I think the primary weakness of this game was the amount of filler in some of the missions. I remember when you're trying to get into the museum to interface with the Penguin, you first have to destroy these 3 radio towers, and if I remember, it takes quite a while, maybe 20 minutes to do, to fly from one to the other, beat up all the people there. They were mostly stealth missions, and then disabling the tower, you had to go around to each of the 3 panels, punch all 3 of the panels individually. Those are the types of things that are called AGLs, you know, artificial game lengtheners. And there were a couple moments in Arkham City in the second act and parts of the first act, but none in the third act, that you feel kind of like our AGLs, artificial game lengtheners. But as I said, you know, Act 3 is so good. It's so action-packed in the type of way that could feel overwhelming to some players, but for most players, it's going to feel like a absolutely amazing action-packed ride. I think it's really a compliment to the writers of the game because I just feel that the story is so strong that when I'm playing in some of the action moments or the puzzles or some of these moments, I'm really just thinking I want to get back to the main plot that was recorded by Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill and all of these guys. They're so good that sometimes the gameplay almost feels secondary and like it should be secondary to the amazing story that they're telling. Because this story really does beat out many of the Batman movies that we've seen with hundreds of $1 million, of production budget. And Rocksteady is juggling two things here. They're juggling a gameplay experience for people that don't care about Batman lore and history and just want to play through a fantastic, fun, action-packed superhero game, and they also have to tell a story. Movies and filmmakers only have to tell a story, and these guys had to tell a game and tell a story, or present a game and tell a story. The finale of this game is incredibly strong. It's profound and impactful in the kind of way that Asylum's story was not, and Asylum was a very cut and dry game, and I think you can really just compare the finale of Arkham Asylum, where the Joker in Asylum becomes a strong version of himself that's 30 feet tall, and you defeat him in a very comic booky Batman the Animated Series type of way, and then comparing it to the ending of Arkham City, which is something that I feel like we would see right out of a movie that would maybe resemble more of the somber episodes of Batman the Animated Series, where you have this incredible character piece where it once again explores the duality of Bruce Wayne and the Joker. It reveals the type of man that Bruce Wayne is. It reveals his philosophy on killing and capital punishment, and in a way that it's really actions speak louder than words. And that scene where he says, "I still would have saved you if you did not, drop that cure, I still would have saved you." When he says that, that's very profound, and it says a lot about who Batman is as a character in this universe, clearly distinguishing him from the films where he is a murderer in almost every iteration of the character in the live-action films. So that was a huge moment for the franchise. There's no doubt about that. In my opinion, that is the single greatest scene in the Batman Arkham franchise. It's incredibly well done. It's bold. It's shocking. It's the type of game that makes you think for weeks after you play it. And that's just the type of experience I don't think we got from Asylum or Night. I wasn't sitting up tossing and turning in bed 2 weeks after beating Arkham Asylum and thinking about the game and how phenomenal it was in terms of the story. But after City, it really leads you thinking, and you just can't get that game off your mind. It leaves a huge impact on you, at least it did for me. Let's talk a bit about the map. I mean, Batman Arkham City is an absolutely beautiful game, and I think that Unreal Engine 4 and the Return to Arkham remaster actually was a huge step back for the game because it looks so good on the PS3. The rain effects were incredible. The Batsuit looked so good. And also the color palette, I think, is much improved as opposed to Unreal Engine 4 with Return to Arkham, where the colors are much brighter, much more simplistic. I think the character definitions are much better in the original Arkham City, and the map aesthetic is also phenomenal. When you look at the Gotham skyline, it's just awe-inducing. It is so good. Traversal admittedly is a little clunky here. You can't really propel super high into the air, and gliding is a little bit clunky, especially if you go back to the game after Arkham Knight. You realize that the free flow, sort of free roam traversal is not the best in this game. Also, the buildings were not designed well for that type of flight mechanics because so many buildings are underwater and they're of so many different heights that it doesn't really flow in the same way that it flows in Arkham Knight. Nonetheless, though, free roam was a huge improvement over Arkham Asylum in this franchise. And the addendum of side missions. In Arkham Asylum, I believe the only side mission was collecting Riddler trophies and the monologue tapes of previous, characters, interviewees, and such. Side missions are incredible. They're well fleshed out in the game. They already used so many villains in the main story, but they still found incredible villains to put in the side missions. You had Hush, Azrael, other big hitters, Deadshot. That was incredible that they managed to do that. It was great to see Bane in this game as well, and those moments with Bane and Aaron Cash I thought were vitally important to connect the dots between Asylum and City. The stakes of this game were also much higher. You can't really deny that. The Protocol 10 countdown is so cinematic. It's better and more tense than most movies you will see. Every hour in your ear, Hugo Strange announces the impending doom, and as soon as the clock strikes 0, shit really does hit the fan, and they kept their promise. That cliffhanger was a huge payoff. So it totally could have been a thing where Protocol 10 was something lame and boring or something that didn't involve the rest of the city, you name it. But when he starts committing mass genocide on villains, I mean, on one hand, you're kind of like, well, they're villains, they're thugs, they're criminals, but also some of them are mentally ill and not really evil people, and they're actually victims in here. They just portrayed all that so well. They explored that so well. You interviewed some of the prisoners. You interviewed some of the other criminals almost that really were not bad people that were just stuck in there. It made you really feel for them, and it added a layer of depth to the story. One of the biggest complaints about Batman is that he indiscriminately beats up, poor people that happen to be criminals or be pushed into a life of crime because of their upbringing. As I said, I think there are great exchanges in the game that you can just press X to talk to some people, and it really fleshes out some of those relationships. People are very candid about why they're in and what they did and why they're not a part of all the madness going on. We also get to see a side of these villains that we don't get to see elsewhere. I mean, it's total chaos. Normally, the police have control over the city, and even if they arrive 30 minutes late to the scene, Penguin and Two-Face and Riddler can't just overtake entire buildings without any recourse, and that's why it was so interesting to see them go in this direction with the Arkham City map as opposed to just Gotham more generally. One thing I think that would have been interesting for this game is to have more cooperation between Bruce Wayne and the GCPD. I think after a certain point, the GCPD realistically would have been more involved in saving Arkham City, shutting it down, and they really were MIA in the entire game. I know that Batman works alone, but it also would have been nice to see him work with Jim Gordon. As I said previously, we don't see him until the very, very end of the game, which I think is a huge disappointment based upon the relationship that we built with him in Arkham Asylum. Speaking of that, I think that Bruce is much more personable in this game. His exchanges with Barbara and Alfred over the intercom are much more lighthearted. He makes more quips. He's a little bit more sarcastic, and I think that he's just more relatable. He talks about more personable things with both Barbara and Alfred. I really liked that touch. As I said, I mean, every aspect of the writing in this game was just leveled up massively, so that was really self-evident. I felt that one of the weaknesses in replaying the game is that we don't get to see our allies, and I think I was spoiled by both Arkham Knight, where we see Barbara Gordon and Tim Drake and Dick Grayson much more, and also with Spider-Man PS4, which took it to a whole nother level where we got to interface with Aunt May as Peter Parker. And certainly we did not get any scenes as Bruce Wayne past the first opening 10 minutes of the game, and we did not get to interface with Alfred or Barbara Gordon in real life. In fact, come to think of it, we never interface with Alfred in real life in the entirety of the Arkham trilogy, besides Batman Arkham Origins. And that's really disappointing. I mean, looking back at it, it's hard to make a very cinematic Batman story without interfacing regularly and in person with Alfred. Arkham Knight was a huge improvement, though, where we could see him in video. That just added a personal touch to it that I thought was really good. You still feel very connected to them, though. It's just that as comparison to what we've been spoiled with recently with Arkham Knight and Spider-Man PS4, it is kind of a deficit that you notice replaying the game. But even so, as I said, your relationship with your allies is much more fleshed out in in City versus Asylum. And I think that that was by design. I mean, Asylum, the aesthetic for it is so good because you feel so alone when you're in the ward with your mom and your dad and their caskets and they're flopping out of the wall there. It's really scary, and I think that it is so because you can't talk to Alfred. We can't interface with Alfred until after we defeat Scarecrow in those nightmare scenes. So it was really by design. It matched the game design of that game to not be interfacing with Alfred and Barbara Gordon regularly. But I thought that it was a huge strength of this game that we got to do that a bit more often, and in Night they improved on that even more. Now, one thing that I'm sort of retroactively critiquing of Batman Arkham City is that it did not do a great job at setting up the sequel. Now, after Arkham Asylum was such a huge success, and they were working on Arkham City, and they knew that they had something good coming with this game, I think that they were well aware, and it was probably already confirmed, that they were going to be working on a sequel to Batman Arkham City. They show us Robin for a hot second, but they do not do anything really to set up a sequel here, which is not so much the case in Arkham Asylum. I think that it was more open-ended, and with the Joker surviving and being locked up, we knew he was going to come back, and we also got a touch of Bane and these other villains, but we certainly knew we were going to see more of them in Batman Arkham City. With Arkham City, though, they kill the Joker in the most remarkable way, but they also kill Talia, they also kill Ra's, they also kill Hugo Strange. They basically just wipe out everyone in this game. And it was shocking, it was effective, it worked in the story, but they really needed to have flashback scenes to the Jason Todd stuff in this game. And I know that it was 4 years apart and they didn't know they were going to go in that direction yet, but they needed to have a stronger vision for where this story was going to go, because I've noticed something about entertainment is that trilogies only really work if there's a strong beginning, middle, and end point. I think that they had a very strong beginning, they had a phenomenal middle, and they had a weak end point. And frankly, the weakness of Arkham Knight to carry on the legacy of Arkham City most assuredly weakens the impact that that game had. Implementing the Joker in Arkham Knight most certainly lightens the impact of the ending of Batman Arkham City. That might be controversial to say, but it's just objectively true. Having Joker in Batman Arkham Knight with 4 to 5 hours of dialogue most assuredly weakens the finale of Batman Arkham City. At the same point, you also could make the argument that they really expand upon the relationship and the duality of Batman and the Joker, and they finish the trilogy and they sort of have a nice end footnote of the story that was continued in Batman Arkham City. I see both arguments, but on the whole, I lean to the fact that Arkham Knight softened the blow of Batman Arkham City because it doesn't adequately carry on the legacy of Arkham City. I think that if they had, Batman Arkham Knight would have been Harley Quinn's revenge over the length of a game. Imagine that Arkham Knight is basically Harley Quinn's revenge, but a 15-hour story, and Harley Quinn is just absolutely livid that Batman has killed the Joker. And there's a mixed public feedback reaction to what happened because many people wanted the Joker to be put behind bars, but they did not want Batman to go in and kill the Joker in the theater. And as far as the general public knows, Batman killed the Joker, and that is the general perception that people have of the situation. Talia al Ghul, his only witness, is dead. Clayface dies, Hugo Strange dies, all these other people that can testify on, against or for Batman are basically dead. It's just Batman and the Joker, just as it was meant to be from the very beginning. I felt that in Night, they could have had a Harley Quinn revenge story, kind of like The Last of Us 2, a revenge type of plot, where basically Harley Quinn seeks revenge on the Bat family and goes to kill the people closest to Batman, just as he killed, allegedly, the person closest to her. It also would have really had a great motivation for Harley. Now, the Harley Quinn DLC in Arkham City is good, but I think that it could have been much better as an expanded full cinematic story as opposed to just a 1-hour story DLC. In Arkham Knight, there's very little mention of the fact that Batman killed the Joker, and what is the perception that people have? Because I imagine, once again, that most people were under the perception that Batman killed the Joker. He didn't go around boasting after the fact that he would have saved the Joker. That was something that he personally told the Joker. He didn't say that to save his public image. He said it because he really meant it. And I think that that is so fascinating. It's one of the strongest points of the game. It really, once again, shows a lot about Batman and this character and who he is in this trilogy. But they kind of just left that alone and didn't really explore that more in Night. And as I said, it might seem absurd to judge a game for its predecessor, but I think it's really fair, honestly, to do that. Arkham Knight did not do a good job at concluding some of the plot lines that were set up in Batman Arkham City and expanding upon that duality that was established so well between Batman and the Joker in City. And I really wanted to see Harley, Batman, Robin, the Bat family, and Joker, and all of Joker's goons, honestly, reconcile what had happened in City. I would have liked to see Harley get closure, and maybe at the end of the game she even forgives Batman. I don't know. That would have been really interesting to see as well. Still could have had Red Hood. You still could have had Scarecrow, but I think that it would have been very, very interesting to have Harley Quinn be her own standalone villain on just this vengeful rage, trying to kill Batman all after the events of Batman Arkham City. That's neither here nor there. Once again, I'm judging the game retrospectively, but I think honestly in this case it's fair to do. On the whole, Batman Arkham City is one of the top 3 best video games ever made. I think that it's almost perfect, and it's so well made that I really honestly replay it every year. The atmosphere of the game is incredible. The story, the main characters, the villains, everything about it is almost flawless. And if you enjoyed this video, and if you agree, and if you give Batman Arkham City a 9 or a 9.5 or a 10 out of 10, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, share it with all of your friends. And I hope you enjoyed this commentary, and stay tuned. I've got a big announcement coming of a series that I'm working on that's going to be leading up to July 22nd. I don't want to share too much about it now, but I will explain more in the future, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the channel, I guess. And if you did, give it a thumbs up. My name is Sligwolf. See you guys in the next one. Peace out.